Welcome to The Drop and our Succession Recap podcast. I'm Osman Faruqi. I'm here with Thomas Mitchell and Mel Kembry to break down episode 9 of Succession season 4. Man, we're getting close to the end. I'm getting sad, team. It's been fun to do this series with you, but I mean, the show that's been such a big part of our lives is wrapping up finally. How are you guys feeling?
I'm feeling sad for Thomas because Succession has been a big round for him and I don't know if he has a job outside of this show.
It's been really fun to be part of the company though for the past 9 weeks. So.
But also I like that Succession has been like an easy small talk go-to for the last 10 weeks. And I was out the other night and there was a couple next to me and they were on their first date and they were talking about Kendall and they were going back and forth about their opinions on Kendall. And so I like that Succession.
Were you just getting visibly angry because you were like, he's obviously sucks?
I was like, I have some thoughts, guys. I just love that Succession has become this go-to subject for everyone. It's this water cooler moment, and it feels like it's been a while since we've had a show like this, and it might be a while until we have another show like this.
Yeah, I like dead set didn't know anyone's name in the office 9 weeks ago. Like, I knew you two, and now I know everybody because everyone's like, hey, man, like, what about last night? Crazy, blah, blah, blah. So
you're the Succession dude.
Yeah, so it's been nice to meet my co-workers.
I mean, you've been working here longer than I have, Thomas. That's hilarious.
Yeah, man, I just kind of keep to myself. You know?
The funeral, it was a funeral-focused episode, which felt fitting in a way because we're getting close to the end of the show, and as they were farewelling Logan, it kind of felt sort of sad and somber to think about us farewelling the show. But I have to say, my initial thoughts on this episode were pretty mixed. It was much longer than the usual eps. It's 73 minutes long. Most of the others are just over an hour, 61, 62 minutes. And I kind of felt that length. I also think that the emotional impact of the funeral was a little bit out of place. Like, I know that in the timeline of the show, it's only been 5 or 6 days since Logan died. So it kind of makes sense for the characters to still feel that kind of like sense of loss. But for us in the real world, it's been like 6 weeks. You know, like I've moved on from Logan now. I'm not thinking about Logan. I feel like the story's moved on. We're dealing with a post-Logan universe, but then they kind of pulled us all back to this point of loss, and it just felt like that episode should have come much sooner in the series. How did you guys feel about being thrust back into the emotional turmoil of these kids losing their dad?
Yeah, I actually felt exactly the same. Like, I definitely felt the length of the episode, and I did feel like a struggle to get into the emotional arc of like mourning Logan again. Like, like you said, it has been 5 days since they lost their dad, so of course it makes sense that the funeral's happening now. But as you said, it's been 5 weeks, and it's also been 5 hours of very intense Succession plot. Like, we've been to Norway, we had the Living Plus fucking debacle, and then we've had a party and an election. Like, a lot has happened, and so to suddenly kind of be reefed back into, okay, time to mourn Logan, just felt a bit jarring to me. Yeah, I don't know. And I also just thought the funeral, I think I built it up in my head a lot. It was going to be like this really grand moment, and like, you know, some of it was grand, but it just didn't quite land for me.
No, I think you guys have wasabi in your eyes. The moment I watched this, I knew Thomas was going to hate it. I knew he loves a Fast and Furious Succession episode. He wants the foot to the accelerator, and I know that this wasn't this episode, but I loved it, and I thought this was true art, and it was so finely tuned, and the way they managed to balance the kind of emotional import with the comedic timing, with the moving the plot forward with this backdrop of kind of violence and protest. One wrong move and it would have felt heavy-handed, or you would have got whiplashed as a member of the audience. And I just thought it hit all the right notes. And I think what back in the past you kind of got from books, you're seeing how that kind of art is manifesting on our TV screens these days.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, there were bits to this episode, particularly the atmosphere of the kind of world around them that I thought was done really, really well. It actually reminded me of a criminally underwatched show, The Good Fight, which is like ostensibly this legal drama, but in its final few seasons basically became a show about living in America post-Trump and the kind of chaos that slowly builds and builds and the tension and the division that's on the streets. And I think balancing the funeral with this sense of like the United States dissolving around the kids because of their choices and seeing the impact of their decisions play out physically and like manifestly in front of them in a real time, I thought was done quite well. But I just still thought that like we could have had that without the distraction of having to think about this character who we all came to grips with. Like Brian Cox did this media tour, right? He basically did an interview with everyone except for us when he left the show. and we all decided to like cut him out. We moved on and having to think about him again, I just think that it was a little bit of a misstep from the show, but you know, who am I to tell these showrunners how to make art? They're doing it very well generally.
Yeah, I feel like Brian Cox and the character needed, like, death is the final show, right? And I think he needed to go out with a big encore.
Okay, let's dive into what happened this episode, which, aside from that funeral, didn't have an enormous amount of plot to it. But as I mentioned, we're dealing with the aftermath of President-elect Jared Mencken, following his anointing by ATN, thanks to Roman and Kendall's decision to back his kind of election victory. Anti-Mencken protesters are taking to the streets of Manhattan. It's not good news for the Roy siblings because it's jamming up traffic on the day of their dad's funeral. And the funeral seems to feature basically everyone who has ever been on the show, including the incoming president, Lucas Matson, and Logan's brother, Ewan, the guy from Babe who gives an impromptu speech in his triumphant return. Roman, despite rehearsing his eulogy, he was supposed to be the star of the show. He breaks down in tears, isn't able to deliver it, leaving Kendall and Shiv to step up and honor their dad instead. Then at the wake, the battle lines for the season finale and the show finale are drawn. Shiv and Matson are on one side, with Kendall leading the anti-Matson faction on the other. Both groups will be pleading their case in the finale to the board to decide who reigns supreme. I think we should start with Ken Team. I feel like the last few episodes, he has really been the focus of where this show is going as we look at the sacrifices he's making in pursuit of power. I mean, at the start of this episode, he basically burns what's left of his relationship with his family. His assistant Jess, who's been loyal and by his side the whole show, she's leaving him. The end of the episode, he pushes Roman away so bluntly. The only people he's still really got around him are those who he's paying, the kind of loyal class of greybeards he's inheriting from his dad. He accused Jess of being juvenile when she quit, but I feel like this episode, Kendall's regression was really on display. I feel like this is a thing you've been saying, Mel, while Thomas and I have been maybe a bit more like interested in where he's going and thinking that maybe he's stepping up. You've been pretty clear that this is a regression season from Kendall. How did this episode fit into that thesis for you?
Yeah, I reckon this is Kendall's Richard III moment. Thomas?
Oh, we're going
Richard
Shakespeare.
I'm more familiar with the first two, Richard, so if you could just catch me up.
There was this dude called Shakespeare and he wrote this play. No, this is the moment where Kendall has done all kinds of bad things. He's killed his siblings, he's betrayed those who trusted him, he's been immoral and manipulative, and then he's got what he wants, and the great tragedy is that he doesn't have anything left. And I think it was that moment, you know, Rava and the kids aren't here. I also thought it was kind of funny that the other person closest to him is his paid assistant, like his employee, Jess. She's departing, and I think this was a kind of moment of realizing what he's lost. And I think kind of the great tragedy of Kendall, later on in the episode he says, life isn't nice, it's contingent. People who say they love you also fuck you. And I think the great tragedy of Kendall is that he has come to really believe that, and that is his worldview, and that's the worldview he now subscribes to and puts to other people as well. Yeah,
I think the Shakespearean stuff is really focused on King Lear for a lot of this show, right? Like as Logan was a center, but there was an interview that Jeremy Strong, who plays Kendall, gave before the show started, where he said that Jesse sort of said, think about Richard the Third, right, when you're coming into the season, and that story, as you mentioned, Mel, is basically the king who alienates and destroys everyone around him and ends up ruling an ash heap. I don't think that necessarily means that Kendall will be like crowned a king, but I do think this season is about him pushing everyone away from him, and the fact that like at the end of the ep he's got Colin, like his dad's bodyguard and best friend, back, and he's got Hugo on his side, and that's kind of it, does reflect that he's become a bit of a soulless guy here. Thomas, what do you think?
And also, sorry, Oz, I don't want to school you on Shakespeare, but famously, Richard III doesn't win. He loses on the battlefield after he's got the throne. Richmond then comes in and takes it from him.
No, feel free to school me on Shakespeare. I'm not a Stratfordian. I'm in the camp that I don't know if there really was just one guy called Shakespeare. He wrote so many great plays, man. It's crazy. There was one guy. You tell me that one guy wrote Othello and Richard III and The Tempest? I don't buy it.
Well, firstly, I was going to say like a lot of that Shakespeare stuff, but I won't because we're obviously been into it now.
Is there a Love Actually reference that might work for you?
Hey, man. I love Love Actually. Yes, so we've covered Shakespeare, so that's that. Whatever, Mel's really smart. But the thing I found about this episode, as a lay person, no, was that, it was very much Kendall at his most unattractive. And for me, it was very much that thing where, like, you know when you have done something really bad, and I think this still is true of Kendall, you know deep down that it's bad, and then when people like force you to like face the consequences of that, you just like feel, you get angry at them and you like feel guilty, and so you lash out. Like the whole thing with Rava when she was taking the kids because like the city's fucking melting down, and the same thing with Jess when she's essentially quitting because of Mencken. He asked her that like to her face and she kind of like deflects. And it was just Kendall being like forced to face the consequences of his poor decisions, and rather than kind of reflect and be like, oh, am I a terrible person surrounded by terrible people? He instead just becomes like the worst version of Kendall Roy. I still love Kendall Roy, don't get me wrong, and like hopefully the people that you interrupted their first date know that. But yeah, it was a sad portrait of Kendall, and probably a very telling portrait of him as we head into the final episode.
Also, there's something going on there, right, about him being a white man and these people who are of non-white backgrounds responding very differently to this situation than him, that shows his kind of ignorance of the real world consequences of what's going on.
Yeah, it's a strange sort of quirk of the show that his daughter Sophie is played by a South Asian actress and is, I guess, supposed to be like a person of color in the show, and so she would be feeling that tension around race play out more than him. I think that's really insightful, Thomas. I feel like Kendall at the very, very start of this, before he even...
Really? I had Shakespeare. And he gets the insightful.
It's because you called me out of my lack of Richard III knowledge, Mel. You're getting marked down. Even before Kendall is in that scene with Rava in the car where he's getting so angry, he's sort of walking around and he's seems to be having a bit of regret about what he's done. Like he's seeing what has happened, and I think you're right, Thomas, that he's lashing out because I think he thinks he might have made the wrong decision. I feel like it was both really funny and really telling that when Rava's explaining how scared she is, he just says like, you're too online. Like you're just on Twitter, like getting freaked about what's going on, which is funny because I think there is a element of truth to that in a way. Like I think during the height of the Trump presidency, there were these like white liberals whose lives were generally fine, who were just like for the first time realizing, because maybe they'd watched CNN a bit too much, that, oh my God, things are pretty weird out there in the world. It's pretty scary, guys. But it's also a pretty depressing line from him because it's not about the internet. Like the streets of Manhattan are tense. Like things are getting boarded up. This isn't just about a fantasy that Rava's created in her head.
No, I agree, and as Thomas mentioned, it's kind of he's not accepting the responsibility he has played in creating this division. Like the idea that she is too online and she's falling into some kind of polemic and believing it, whereas he has also been responsible for doing that on ATN. Like it's this complete abdication of responsibility, as we saw with King Richard III.
I was just sad that he didn't lie down in front of the car. He threatened it.
Classic, real toxic behavior as well. Like, you're going to have to run me over, if you want to take my kids away.
Yeah, and then I was wondering if Rava had got an Uber. Like, I was like, Rava had a driver, and I was like, I wonder what their, like, separation arrangement was.
Yeah, at least like an Uber Black for sure.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Roman as a sort of entry point into this funeral. The episode started with him being super confident, rehearsing those lines, pumping himself up, taking the piss out of his siblings, and I feel like that's never a good sign. Whenever anyone is feeling like in control and confident, Succession tears them right back down. And I thought it was pretty extraordinary that we all talked about how last week Roman helped usher in fascism and revealed himself to be duplicitous and selfish and like a monster. And this episode, even though we don't forgive him for that, you just see a boy mourn the loss of the one figure in his life that he looked up to and break down crying. It's hard to not feel some kind of emotional sympathy towards him, like that the way that the show can have you feel these two things in the space of a week is pretty extraordinary. I mean, what do you guys make of his failure to be able to deliver at the funeral?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a big episode for Roman, and I think you definitely end up feeling something for him. I mean, some people more than others. Like, look, I don't mean to kind of break the rhythm here, but I just need to get this off my chest.
Okay.
Mel had a sex dream about Roman last night. And she divulged this to me privately, but
Okay,
obviously this is amazing pod fodder.
This is obviously fake news.
We have to unpack your dreams about Roman on this show,
Okay,
Mel. I'm sorry.
Oh my
Firstly,
God.
my mother listens to this podcast,
And
and I said
I
I had a dream about Roman, and you've filled in some kind of gap.
Yeah, but if someone says to you, I had a dream about someone, like, it's never a non-sex dream.
I mean, that's maybe reflects more on you than me.
Well, okay, what was the dream?
It's incredible take, Thomas.
I mean, people have dreams all the time.
What were you doing though? Were you guys like playing backgammon? What was the go?
No, I feel like it was post-funeral. I was in the world of the wake, and I was just empathetic to Roman's plight.
But was there a vibe?
I think I can say I had a dream about Roman because I found his character quite affecting in this story, and I thought it was very good. He started off on top of the world, really distant from the reality of what was going on in the streets of New York in his high-rise apartment, and really distant from his own emotional feelings. And then he ended up in it, right? He ended up on the streets of New York and really in his emotion. So I thought he had this huge movement over that episode.
Yeah, I think we've been kind of slowly watching the unraveling of Roman. Like, he was obviously a total chaos agent in the last episode, and this very much felt to me like the end of the Roman narrative. It was, Roman the showman, blah blah blah, but it's a bit like, thanks for coming. Like, he was finished. He totally, as Kendall said, he totally fucked it. And it was hard to watch. Like, his breakdown at the funeral was amazing acting by Kieran Culkin, and that was a heartbreaking scene, and amazing that we were able to feel for him after he was so awful last episode. But yeah, like that whole, like at the start when he's like, don't I remind you of him just a little bit, and then at the end of this episode he couldn't be further from Logan Roy and the myth of Logan Roy. And at the end of this episode, had Logan been alive, he would have been so disappointed in Roman for like failing to deliver in that big moment. So to me, I mean, and I've been wrong plenty of times before, as we all know, but I feel like maybe that was the end of Roman as far as he goes as a power player in the Succession universe. He dropped the ball. He's kind of become a full-blown sociopath at this point, and yeah.
But can't you see this as the beginning? Can't we reframe this as the beginning of a new Roman? He's a Roman who is finally in touch with his emotions and capable of showing them that he won't play this stifling game of capitalism and the big mega business. Can't we see this as Roman's actually a success story here?
I mean, is he in touch? He ends the episode by running into like a crowd to get trampled on as like a form of punishment. So yeah, I think he's got a fair bit going on.
Yeah, fair.
The other thing I thought about Roman in this episode, but I don't know if it's just me, but he's like growing his facial hair to look like Logan. And in the last couple of episodes, he started wearing those kind of cable knit sweaters as well. He's I think the show's been consistent in a way since the death of Logan, that Roman has just been spun out, and like he kind of managed to win the last episode by getting the outcome he wanted, but that was ultimately because Shiv failed so spectacularly. He's kind of Stephen Bradbury'd his way to quote unquote winning that episode. But in reality, he's consistently just been completely overwhelmed by that loss of Logan. And I think Mel, as much as you were keen to have these characters grow emotionally in some way, him basically wanting the protesters to punish him because of what a bad boy he'd been and how he let down his dad, I think is the opposite of emotional growth. I think he's also regressed right back to when he was a kid, locked up in a cage, being thrown snacks by his dad or whatever they were up to.
I mean, it's a journey, Oz. It doesn't happen overnight. Also, I liked that in his wardrobe he had all these, speaking of your knits, he had all these like knits, and he had a lot of mustard knits, and I was like, I have never seen Roman wear mustard as a colour, so maybe that's in his future. Also, I was really wondering what moisturiser he was wearing. Like, you know how he put it on? I was like, is that La Mer? Like, what would a man like him be putting on his skin?
Well, he looks about 13, so whatever he's doing is like working, obviously.
Yeah, sign us up.
Let's talk about Shiv. So she finally revealed her pregnancy to her family, to her mother and to her siblings. It didn't really feel like that did anything in terms of the plot at all here. I feel a bit astray about what the pregnancy is supposed to be doing. I mean, we've talked before on the show about how, she's grappling with the sense of motherhood, her actually having to confront the awfulness of her mum is making us think again she's probably quite worried about raising a kid given how she was raised. But we kind of knew all that. Like, that had been the through line of her pregnancy storyline throughout this entire season. Do you think anything interesting is going to come of that, or is it kind of that's it? We've seen what we're going to see from Shiv grappling with this pregnancy question.
Yeah, I think her pregnancy, and I remember when she first revealed she was pregnant, we were all kind of a bit hesitant. Where is this going to go? But I think it's just become a really quick and easy shorthand to show a lot of things about the relationships and the characters in the world, like how cooked her relationships are, like her mother's response, kind of, it was so nicely summed up their relationship through her response to her pregnancy. The kind of machoism of the world was again summed up by Matsson's response to her pregnancy in this episode. And so I think it does serve this function, because I think it's easy to forget that Shiv is kind of a lone woman. Obviously, there are other women in the series, but in this very male-dominated industry. And I kind of, I get a lot of humour out of seeing how uncomfortable they are with her, physical reality.
Yeah.
They're so uncomfortable with it. They don't know what to do with it or how to process it or how to process her.
Well, Roman's making jokes about him having sex with Shiv is the only way he knows how to respond.
Yeah, totally. And I kind of like also I like the symmetry of Logan dying and a new Roy generation coming. I think that's quite neat as well. So I think I am actually quite happy with what Shiv's pregnancy has done for the series.
Yeah, I kind of, I'm on the same page as you, Oz. I don't really feel like it's done a lot. I mean...
You're a bit uncomfortable with it?
Yeah, I just find the whole thing awkward. No, it just doesn't have...
Great to have two guys in this podcast be like, yeah, this woman's pregnant, this is not really important. And Mel's like, no, this is revealing a lot of important stuff about dynamics and the way that women are perceived by men.
There was a YouTube commenter on the YouTube videos who was like, thanks for having a woman on the podcast. And so I feel like this is for them.
Yeah, I reported that comment. But I think that it was more... I think the reason I found it interesting in this episode was I was waiting for the reveal to the mum because it's such a strange relationship. It also gave a really great line when she was the mother walked in and she was like, I thought I could hear the sound of Dalmatians howling, which was incredible.
But really good.
But yeah, especially the interplay with Mattson when he was like, I heard, maybe you're like pregnant or whatever. And she's like really quick to be like, oh, don't worry, I'm going to be one of those hard bitches, like, 36 hours in the maternity ward, emailing during labor. Like she more than anyone is aware of the optics of it and what it means for her as she's currently trying to position herself as, best possible to kind of.
And Mattson can't even say the word. He does like
yeah,
this
he
little
does he does like an air bump. Yeah. I know.
Can't even bring himself to address it.
Yeah, because I think in Sweden they still like get delivered by storks and shit. It's fucking weird over there. But like, yeah, I thought it was interesting like that, and I guess like more generally, Shiv, as we'll probably get on to, stepped up to also do a eulogy, and she kind of makes reference to, I guess, the role of women in Succession, or like relating to Logan. She talks about how he was hard on women. He couldn't fit a whole woman inside his head. And one of my favorite moments of the episode, and actually one of my favorite scenes from Succession throughout the 4 series, was seeing Logan's like harem, like his 4 women sitting on that pew together. That was like this really actually kind of strangely beautiful moment for a show that doesn't often offer up many beautiful moments. And I thought all of that was kind of connected. We got this light shone on, what a very strange and ugly place it can be for a woman in that world, and yet there was this kind of like show of unity, which I thought was quite nice.
Yeah, a whole bunch of characters who have all been so stern and kind of cold and calculating, or at least that's how we've been told to think about them, all being quite human and kind of caring for each other on that pew. It felt like it came out of left field, but it kind of made sense. One thing I was thinking about in this episode while Shiv was interacting with her mum was that line from Kendall in the election episode. He says, does the poison trickle down? And I feel like in this episode, we got a lot of evidence that yes, it does. Like the way that Shiv is talking about how she will raise her kids and basically, kick them out as soon as they're out of her womb for someone else to raise is a direct, something she's directly inherited from her mom. And even though it's kind of fucked her up, she's still willing to do it. We also got this amazing reveal via brother Ewan, James Cromwell, who returns and delivered this incredible eulogy where he revealed details about
an Emmy award-winning eulogy.
Yeah, it was great. We'll talk. Well, I want to hear more about what you got to say about it, Mel. But just in terms of this idea of families and how the decisions made multi-generations above can impact, the current generation. He talks about the way that the auntie and uncle that raised Logan and him never forgave Logan for the death of their sister. And Logan was racked with guilt from that because he thought that maybe he had given her polio, and that absence of a parental figure, that punishment and that he thought that he'd received from the people that did raise him clearly shaped him into who he is, shaped his kids into who they are, and is now going to shape his grandkids as well. To me, it's pretty clear that the answer to Kendall's question of does the poison trickle down is like an unequivocal yes. But what else did you make of Ewan's eulogy, guys?
Oh, I loved his whole eulogy. I like that it started off with kind of this sob story and he kind of conjured the sympathy of look what this family has been through, and then he came out with that line that was like a priest delivering it from the pulpit of like, he has wrought the most terrible things, and he delivered it so well. And then the flame that keeps their hearths warm while another grows cold, and they did this brilliant cut to Jerry in the audience, and she just had her like hands over her mouth, just shocked by it, and then Carl was giving the side eye to it, and I thought it was just so brilliant. And also it's like this idea of these two brothers have turned out so differently, even though they've come from the same beginnings. They have such different worldviews now, but also they're kind of similar in a way, because you could see Logan pulling the same theatrical performative move as well, and having the kind of gumption to push past people to get up to have his say. And then I guess for me, it kind of made me think like in 40, 50 years, would this be the situation of Shiv and Kendall and Roman? Like, is that going to be the state of their relationship? Will they be delivering similar eulogies for each other?
Yeah, I kind of thought the same thing. But, like, it was interesting because, I was so glad that Ewan, like, storm the stage and like grab the mic. Because to me, it really forced you to remember that, you know, there are lots of terrible things that happen in the world, and everyone is a victim of their own circumstances, and these terrible things happen to them, and, you know, specifically Logan feeling that guilt and everything. But I loved how Ewan ended it with, like, you know, he fed a certain kind of meagerness in men, and perhaps I have that too, but, like, basically I was sad when he's stopped deciding to try. Like, that was the biggest shame, when he stopped trying and he kind of gave in to the bitterness that, you know, we both have inside us. And that kind of is like, you know, that's true of everybody. Like, everyone has a situation that can probably ruin them or whatever, but, like, it's the moment you stop, like, trying to be good or whatever that you just give in and you're like, okay, well, fuck it, I'll just be...
Brene Brown, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It reminds me of Richard III, actually. No, but yeah, I thought that was really good. And two things I want to add to that. I loved when he sat down and Greg was like, that was a good hard take. Like, has to give immediate feedback on the eulogy, which was amazing. And also... just like slightly sad that he didn't end his eulogy with "That'll do, pig," because I think that would have been like a lovely Easter egg for everybody.
I'm glad you brought up Greg. I feel like he had another like low-key starring success in this episode. He O-bikes his way to the funeral, which is a hilarious scene. Just for a couple of seconds, seeing him powering his way down. He takes Tom's spot as pallbearer. He doesn't stop Ewan, but he still manages to introduce himself to like the new president of the United States. Greg is just killing it, I feel, the last few eps.
I was such a fan of the city bike scene. I was like, only Greg in the one episode would ride a city bike and then also meet the president. Like, amazing.
But also I love, did you see when he turned up at the funeral, he was all like, they did a close-up of his face and he was all sweaty from it. Like, he had like drips of sweat from his bike ride.
Let's talk about the wake. Thomas, I feel like this is where whatever plot there was in this episode was sort of isolated, right? We sort of had the funeral, and then we had this extra kind of like 14 minute scene where things were set up for the finale. Break down what happened here and how it sort of fits into where the show's going.
Yeah, well, essentially, I guess we had, like, everyone gathered back in the one spot again, but then it seemed to switch to, like, business mode, and essentially we had Jared Menken there, and Kendall pretty quickly makes a beeline for him, basically to kind of shore up what, you know, they've agreed to, that, you know, they've helped him get elevated to president-elect, and in exchange, he will help kill the Madsen deal by, you know, like, regulating it to death, essentially. At the same time, you've got Shiv, who's still Team Madsen, who basically wants to get him in front of Menken and say, look, you know, we want this deal to go through. We're prepared to kind of like bend the rules a little bit. We'll get an American CEO to make it more palatable to you, and off we go. At the same time as Kendall's kind of trying to work Madsen, he's also kind of like starting to build his team, essentially. He approaches Hugo, he approaches Frank. He has some pretty strong words.
Colin?
Yeah, we'll get to Colin. He has some pretty strong words for Roman, and also we see the return of Colin, who he also brings on staff. So Kendall's on like a hiring spree. So there was a lot going on that was basically like forward gaming, I guess, for the finale. So yeah, it was a busy wake, and as we all know, wakes are kind of strange. Like, it's always a strange vibe at the wake, because, like, you know, people are like obviously highly vulnerable and emotional, and like maybe a bit pissed. So it was you know, it was probably the time for all these things to be going on, but a lot happened.
Kendall collecting all of those people you mentioned, it really gave me like Ocean's 11 vibes. Like, he's just one by one being like, all right, you're back in the team. We're going to pull this one off. Mel, I mean, the show is running out of time, and we needed to get to the climactic episode, which seems like it'll be just like a boardroom stoush. Did it feel like that naturally felt like where this episode was going? I kind of felt like it was a little bit tacked on for me, but is that just inevitable when you get to the end of a show? You've got to take some shortcuts and just, you know, put the chess pieces on the board and like watch hell be unleashed.
Yeah, to me it felt quite natural, and I think it didn't overplay or overwork that kind of need in the penultimate episode to get to a situation where you could set up for a grand finale. Like, I think they blended it in really seamlessly with the funeral and the wake plot. And it wasn't overworked and didn't feel heavy-handed. So I think they did a really good job at that, and I think they set it up extremely well for, you know, bringing it back into in-house, the board, the familiar faces, and the final showdown.
One thing I was curious about, was like, and this felt like a bit of TV magic, which doesn't happen often in Succession, but like the conversation between Kendall and Mencken, Mencken flipped so quickly. Like, they've essentially just elevated him to president-elect. It was such a big like deal. It was so much like kind of comms between him and Roman, and Kendall approaches him basically to say like, hey man, like, just checking we're all good that, you'll kill this Matsson deal by blah, blah, blah. And really quickly, he doesn't even pretend to give them any assurances. Like, I think so Kendall says to him like, oh, given how we've been pleased to cooperate on shared vision. And Mencken replies, I thought you were the sound system. Now you want to choose the track. And I just thought, was that like a bit weird that, they've essentially nailed themselves to this Mencken train on the proviso that he will, kill the Matsson deal. And then like the next day, he's just flipped on that and he's giving them nothing. Like he's like, oh, I don't, I'm not wedded to that idea.
Mate, the people who say they love you will also fuck you.
To me, that was another indication of just how bad these brothers are at running the show. Like, Kendall, I think, realized that and was aware of what had happened at that point where he says, we have no leverage. Like, our leverage was the election and what we chose to do on election night. We did that with him, but, like, he could fuck us, and he did, basically. And now we've got, he's got our dick in his hands, what we need his dick in our hands. So I think it was an acknowledgement that they didn't really think this stuff through, and you would have thought that Logan would have had a contingency, he would have had dirt on him, he would have had a plan to hold him in line. But I think Roman didn't realize it. Kendall did realize that they'd screwed themselves, and I thought that was like the moment where he realized he had to push him out, basically, and take control of the strategy.
Similar to that, I was wondering, do we believe in Matsson's faith in Shiv? Because to me it felt like when she approached him at the funeral, he had this dismissive, oh hey, and then he like awarded her this condescending gold star. And then when they were at the wake, and it was kind of like his last ploy to be like, how about an American CEO? Do we believe that Matsson actually has faith in Shiv? Because my feeling is maybe he's not all in on Shiv.
No, I mean, I don't want to step on my predictions too much, but I do think that the kids are easily the dumbest decision makers in this show, particularly compared to Jared Mencken and Lucas Matsson. I think those guys are using those guys are using the kids for what they need, basically. They're extracting what they need. I have no doubt in my mind that if Matsson needs to cut Shiv loose to get the result he wants, he'll do it in a heartbeat, the way that Mencken did with Roman and Kendall.
Agreed.
Let's move to our best lines of this episode. Mel, what have you got?
So this is early in the episode. Connor comes out of the woodwork at the funeral and he's decided that he too would like to give a speech, even though it's been decided that he won't. And I like that Willa is like, it's formally inventive. That's what we like about it, which suggests something like it's a wild eulogy. And he hands it over to Shiv and Shiv says, right, but I think this eulogy is going to leave us open to legal action. And I really enjoyed that. Like, a eulogy, which is usually such a soft touch, like in this case, has to be sent to like legals, and it could be defamatory. And it's kind of the absurdity of the grandstanding going on, that everyone wants to give a speech and they are all so contentious. And I actually wanted to ask you guys who you would have most liked to give a speech that didn't give a speech. Because it made me start thinking, I was like, what would Connor have actually said? Like, how wild would have that speech been? And then I was thinking, who else could have given a pretty awesome speech?
I think
I was going to say Greg as well. Last time we saw Greg kind of give a speech was at Congress, and it was so good. I would have loved to see that at the funeral.
Yeah, that's good.
Also, because I feel like he would be the type to like relish the opportunity, despite the fact he's so ill-equipped for it. So yeah. I think, a Greg eulogy would be an absolute shit show that I would tune in for.
And I like the idea that he would have tried to parrot this highfalutin language that they were all using, but it would have sounded so awkward coming out of his mouth.
Greg's attempt to do Richard III would have been very, very, very fun. The abridged version, the one that Thomas reads.
AKA Wikipedia.
The last few episodes, I've really been character assassinated on this pod as like some kind of. Well, we'll come back to it.
Get your lawyers onto it.
Yeah, seriously.
Thomas,
all right.
What was your favourite line?
Yes, so mine was, I've actually gone for not a funny one this week. I've gone for like one that was more sweet, And like I said earlier, I really liked that scene with the, Logan's 4 exes, and when they're kind of sitting in the pew and Marsha grabs Kerry's hand and it's all a bit strange and they all feel a bit weird, and she says, at least he won't grind his teeth tonight, and they all kind of like share a laugh about this weird shared trait of this old man they're all fucking. But I thought that was really sweet and it made me laugh, and I've always been like kind of Marsha curious, not like how you're Roman curious, but I've always found her quite watchable, and I thought she did very well with the little she had in this episode. So yeah.
And she had a great like funeral attire on, didn't she?
She did.
The idea of all your exes being at your funeral and talking about how you sleep and stuff like that, it's a pretty terrifying thought. But I guess, you're dead, so you're not really going to care.
But also, I like that their trauma from him is so great that it can overcome any kind of jealousy or protectiveness. It's like they are like, we've been through something that it's like going to war or something. Like we'll always be joined by this.
That's kind of the spin-off we need. There's been a lot of chat about spin-off shows, but that's the one I'd probably be most keen on.
Yeah.
The Four Brides of Logan Roy. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm cheating this week because there's only 2 episodes to go, and there was 3 bits of dialogue from this episode that I thought was so funny for different reasons. The first one is towards the start when Shiv and Lucas Matson are talking about leaking the India numbers to sort of bury them while everyone's distracted by the election aftermath. Lucas Matson's getting cold feet, and he says, if you've got a little dicky, maybe don't go to the nudist beach. And Shiv is so quick to say, a tsunami's just washed everything out. No one is checking the dicks. This show is crazy. That's such a funny bit of dialogue. And then the other 2 very quick ones are this interaction when Greg rocks up to the funeral and says hello to Matson and Shiv, and Matson just responds, "Hey, sexy," which is great. And something that I have saved for my own pleasure myself.
And HR suit.
And then the final one is Kendall getting Hugo on board by saying, you're going to be my dog and I'm going to feed you scraps, but the scraps will be millions. And Hugo just has a woof woof, which I've also saved for my own collection.
Hugo is such a strange cat, man. He's been so weird this season. I love it.
I really enjoyed when they were going into the funeral and he was like, "Oh, it could have been worse weather."
Okay, on to Jerry Watch. She was back after an absence last week. A pretty minor role, but a pretty interesting one. The only kind of real dialogue from her is at the wake, I think, when all the greybeards are passing around this video of like Roman sobbing and they're making fun of him. And she kind of sticks up for him, right? She says, "Oh, come on, guys, like, don't share it around. We don't need to do that." I thought it was like smart and interesting because even when Jerry and Roman had their bust up, she felt mixed about it, right? She's like, "I could have taken you to the top. Like, you screwed me, but I could have taken you to the top." There is still a connection there, and I don't know if we'll see it play out in the final episode, but it might be that Roman's only path to like emotional salvation, Mel, that you want him so desperately to have, is to have some kind of relationship with that mother figure in his life, in Jerry.
Also, I like that Jerry was sitting directly behind him in the funeral too. So often you could see his like weeping face and then Jerry was just behind. She did have another line like early in the funeral. She was like, "How much of you is glad?" when they were talking about how they were feeling about Roman's death. So I think Jerry's going through a bit of a soul-searching moment. Maybe getting a bit of distance from the company has made her kind of reevaluate it and what the company and the business has done to her. But I actually thought those cutaways to the boiled eggs during the funeral, they were like my highlight of the funeral, like just cutting away to Carl and Frank and Carolina and Jerry, and they didn't say anything. It was just like their looks on their face as these eulogies were being read. That was a real highlight of the series, of the show for me.
Yeah, they've done a lot of good background work the last few episodes. I thought it was particularly crushing that I'm pretty sure it was Carl at the end of the episode, he's like watching the clip of Roman, which is like going viral, like sobbing like a sow at the funeral or something. And that is exactly something Roman would do as well. He is that cruel. But I was like, oh, he's like, he keeps like, you can see he's like rewinding it with his finger. I'm like, oh man, don't keep watching it. But yeah, I guess like for Jerry, I suspect maybe similar to Roman, like her arc is possibly finished. I don't know if they're going to play a big role in the finale. So yeah, again, thanks for coming, Jerry. It's been a pleasure, and I'll always be your slime puppy.
There is just to take us back to the Shakespearean stuff, and we're talking about spin-offs. Like in Hamlet, there's Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, right? Who are just sort of these side characters who sort of occasionally comment on what's going on, and I feel like these greybeards play a sort of similar role. Tom Stoppard has this great play, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, which is basically Hamlet told through the eyes and perspectives of these side characters, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. I would love, give me another 4 seasons of everything that happened in this show, but we just cut away and we watch Frank and Carl and Hugo and Jerry just deal with the crises or make comments on it. It'd be so fun.
And I know you've had to you've redeemed yourself with a Shakespearean reference.
Stoppard, baby. I've read literature. I know what's up.
Have you guys seen Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet? Because the thing I wanted to say about that is that Leonardo DiCaprio is great in it.
That fish tank scene.
Okay, let's move on to Fun Fact Corner. We're back with you this week, Thomas. What have you got?
Yeah, so I think that arguably the greatest tragedy of Succession ending is that people won't get any more fun facts from me about where it's shot.
That we could also find on Reddit.
Yeah, but I mean, who wants to open up Wikipedia when I can just read it out to you? So this is another location-based fun fact.
We're back with the locations.
That's what's up. Everyone open up their maps. No, because I think that there was an important, like, location-based episode. Obviously, they had a very beautiful church, and as you were watching
every episode location-based.
Yeah, but like, the church was such a feature of the episode, and as I was watching, I was like, I wonder where that is, and now you're about to find out, and it's about to be fun. As it turns out, that was the Church of St. Ignatius Loyola, which is a Catholic parish church on the Upper East Side in Manhattan. Obviously, a very beautiful church. It was established in 1851. Now, the interesting thing about that is that it actually, obviously it played home to a very famous fictional funeral in succession for the great Logan Roy, but it has actually hosted some very notable funerals in its time. So, look, I want to take you through some of these. We were speaking off air, Osman, you actually came pretty close. You guessed maybe JFK.
I did, because I was saying I was surprised that, I think there's been a reference to Logan being Catholic before, but for a Scot, that feels surprising. I think Scots tend to be Presbyterians rather than Catholics. So I was thinking, well, what other people could have been, farewelled in this beautiful Catholic church? I thought JFK. So it's not JFK, but it's someone like him.
So it was actually your fun fact idea.
But so it wasn't JFK, but yeah, Jackie Onassis had her funeral in the church. Yeah.
Yeah.
Never heard of her, Jackie O.
See, look at you both having fun with that fact.
That is great.
This one, Osman, you'll love. You probably won't get because you don't really listen to hip hop. Okay, who is the most talented R&B artist to have ever died in a plane crash?
Aaliyah.
Yes, her funeral was there as well.
No, you're joking. Jackie Onassis, Aaliyah, and Logan Roy were all farewelled at the same Catholic church in the Upper East Side. That's amazing.
And I'll just give you a couple more to round out this kind of semi-sad fun fact corner. Philip Seymour Hoffman also buried there. Yeah. Oscar De La Renta, the fashion designer, and Mario Cuomo, the governor of New York, in 2015. So yeah, weirdly, it's a busy church, and I'm glad that Logan managed to get in there.
Your son is getting christened this weekend.
He is.
Is there anything you've learnt from this church operation that you might like to employ in your son's christening?
Just keep a pretty strict security on who gets up on stage, because my old man fancies himself as a good public speaker, but mostly he sounds like he's lost in a grocery store. So I'm going to keep him away from the stage.
You have wrought terrible things.
Yeah, screaming at the baby. That's actually lucky because I'm half Greek, and ethnic christenings are incredibly traumatic. Everyone is hairy and sweating and the baby's nude. They go for 7 hours, whereas this is just this is more of a white christening, so it'll just be they don't have to get nude or anything, so it should be fun.
My only reference to christenings really is like the scene in the end of The Godfather, where as Michael is becoming godfather to his nephew, there's a montage of him assassinating all of his underworld opponents. I'm just thinking about you, Thomas, as you're there standing over your child, thinking about all the people you've taken hits out on this week.
No, but it's just a supercut of me introducing myself to everyone in the office.
I'm Thomas from Succession.
A genuinely great fun fact, and of course there is a Shakespeare connection to Aaliyah. I think Kanye has a song where he raps, "First Aaliyah, now Romeo must die." So there you go. We've got,
Which is also Oz, you win.
Got it all happening.
You win.
And just as I get a step further, Romeo Must Die, sick movie starring Jet Li.
Great film. Great. So many layers to that one line from Kanye West back when he wasn't crazy and we could talk about him without feeling weird. Anyway, let's get on to our winners and losers. Getting close to the end. The tally is getting tight. There are some clear leaders emerging. Thomas, go for it.
I gave Kendall 3 points. I mean, look, the reality is when the going got tough at the wake, Kendall basically went on a hiring spree. He set himself up for next episode, and I feel like he's in pole position for whatever's going to happen in the final episode. I also have started giving him my points just to safeguard against the fact that Mel refuses to give him points, and basically to kind of even out the playing field.
Sorry, I don't understand. You say he handled himself well as he screamed at the wife, his ex-wife and his children and his assistant, yelled at Roman, everyone who has loved him and stood by him.
I look forward to you justifying giving Roman 3 points after he got trampled by a mob.
In touch with his emotions.
And I gave Greg 2 points because, I mean, we said it before, this guy rode a city bike to the funeral and then he met the president. Like, if anyone can fail up, it's Greg. And then I gave Mattson 1 because I think the fact that he managed to kind of stay in the game and meet the president-elect, I do think he's probably lying to Shiv, but he's now, possibly going to be able to get this deal across the line, despite the fact that it could easily have gone wrong for him. And my loser was obviously Roman. As Kendall said, he completely fucked it. He did what his dad never wanted him to do, which was fail in front of everybody. He couldn't deliver on his big moment, and then he ended the episode basically like punishing himself by getting run over by a crowd of angry mob that he helped create. It was an absolute L from Roman.
You don't understand him.
Not in the same intimate way you do, yeah.
Mel, give us your points.
So I went 3 points for Hugo. He was so busy this episode. He was doing briefings, he was backgrounding, he was setting himself up for the future, he was woof-woofing everywhere. 3 points for Hugo. I think he's got a bright future ahead of him. I gave Supermum Shiv 2 points. She bonded with Mencken. She's got Mattson and Mencken in conversation. She's got Mattson's numbers out of the way. She set herself up for CEO, and she's actually gone a bit of a way towards healing with Tom, I thought. So well done, Shiv. And I gave 1 point to Greg. I thought he was really hustling this episode. He was not only on the bike, but he was carrying the coffin. He was meeting the president. I really liked when he was meeting the president and he was like pointing at Kendall and being like, "This guy knows me well." I thought that was a very funny moment. But I'd also like to give a notable mention to my main man, Colin, the bodyguard in denim.
Back. He was back.
I don't want to say I've had a stake in Colin from the start. I predicted he might come back this episode. He's come back. He's seeing a professional to heal, which we like in this podcast. And now he's got himself a new job. So, well done, Colin.
Yeah, really interesting though that Ken really doesn't want him to see a therapist. It was like those seasons of The Sopranos where everyone's worried about Tony going to see a shrink because he's going to be spilling the family business and the family secrets, and so Kendall's basically like, I'll come back into the fold, I'll pay you well, you can be a bodyguard again, just don't talk to a therapist about what my dad put you through, basically.
But also, I love how Kendall's like, you can talk to me. Like, what a fucking shit show that would be. Imagine Kendall being like your therapist. Like, good luck, man. Good luck with that growth.
Also, it was kind of hypocritical, right? Because Ken is seeing the best grief doctor in the country. Yeah. There's a level of hypocrisy.
Okay, so my 3 points go to Greg for the reasons you guys said. Like, he became a pallbearer, he met the president, he's just collecting powerful and influential friends, and Matsson's calling him sexy. Like, that's a great win. That's all I really aspire to in life. Shiv, 2 points. Like, she was basically out of the game. She was done and dusted last week, but because she's willing, we didn't really talk about this earlier, but she really revealed herself this episode that she doesn't believe in anything. If you were rooting for Shiv because you thought she was like the show's moral conscience and she's kind of the liberal figure, she made it so clear that none of that matters to her. She can be best friends with Jared Mencken. She can create crazy deals where Gojo will use their algorithm to boost this new fascist president because it will mean that she could be the American CEO. So for being willing to sell her soul, she gets 2 points, and Kendall gets 1 for the reasons that Thomas mentioned earlier. Also, yeah, Roman is my obvious loser. The tallies shifted. Kendall is at the top of the charts, followed by Tom, Roman, Shiv, and Greg, who's had a pretty big jump this week. Okay, time for predictions. This is our last one ever, and I'm not sure I've gotten any of these right. I'm not sure any of us have gotten any of these right, but they're still fun to do. For me, this is something I was alluding to earlier in the conversation. I think there's a chance that Matsson and Mencken end up coming to some sort of arrangement and just completely isolating the kids. I don't think the kids will end up in any terrible situation. They're still going to be billionaires, but they may have inadvertently just brought these two characters together to plunder their company, to pillage it, to take what they need and leave the kids with a empty shell, essentially. I feel like that's a grim ending, but I was thinking a lot after watching this episode, like, what is the point of the show? What does Jesse Armstrong want us to take away from it? What does it say about 2023? And to me, it's a corrupt neo-fascist president working with a eccentric lunatic tech billionaire to create a new world order and leave these billionaire nepo babies feeling sorry for themselves and licking their wounds. That's where I think we're going. Thomas.
I mean, that was a pretty good answer. So I feel like a bit like Roman following you in here. It's like a kind of a stitch up. Yeah, tech billionaires and stuff. Well, I mean, firstly, I'm sad that we can't predict Logan's funeral anymore because it's happened. So I don't know what Mel's going to say. Like, a part of me thought that perhaps we would go right back to the beginning. The opening episode of this show ended up with a promise of succession to kind of be executed. Kendall was meant to take over from Logan, and you know, therein lies the premise of the show, and obviously that didn't happen. And I wondered if we were getting like a bigger picture version of that. We've had a promise from Matsson to Shiv that she will become the CEO. We've had a kind of very vague, flimsy promise from Mencken to Roman to Roman and Kendall, I suppose, that they, you know, he will help them take over. And yeah, similar to you, will both of those people kind of pull a Logan, take us back to the start and screw the kids? And again, we see these Roy siblings being promised something that was never probably going to happen for them. I mean, I think we're now 9 episodes into this show. We've spoken about it to death. I just don't fucking know anymore. I'm so confused by what's going to happen. Like, that's part of the joy of Succession, I suppose. But yeah, I really don't know how it will end. I probably just predict that, you know, there will be emptiness for these empty people. I don't think it's going to be a happy ending. And if anything, we kind of spoke about this off air, Mel, you know, it might feel the most similar to The Sopranos, where, you know, you have an ending scene that basically gives you a snapshot of exactly what Tony Soprano's life will be like, but is he alive? Is he dead? Is he constantly living on the edge? Like, do we know anything about what the future holds for these people? Probably not.
Do you think Roman will be wearing mustard sweats?
I mean, that's kind of up to your subconscious.
Mel, talk me through your predictions.
Okay, well, I have to say I've been plagiarised here. Do you want to fess up to that?
No, but I totally agree. I think your comparison to The Sopranos at the pub was right, and I'm glad I lifted it.
My prediction, which I floated, was that, I think the siblings, the 3 of them will win. But ultimately, you'll get the sense that the game doesn't stop, which I guess was my reference to that Sopranos ending, spoiler alert, that, you know, Tony might be in charge, but every time the door opens, he's like wondering if someone's coming for his head. And so I wondered if it will be a similar ending.
Heavy is the head that wears the crown, hey Mel.
Exactly. Or even, if we want to take it to Shakespeare, maybe it's a bit of a Lady Macbeth situation, like always kind of washing your hands, trying to get rid of the blood that is on it that you can't. So maybe we'll see that. But also, I was kind of, this is a bit of a hope more than a prediction, but I hope that Tom gets some sleep because he has been tired for many episodes now. So I hope that guy gets some annual leave, some day in lieus. I hope he gets to go to Italy like you was and find his kind of, find life and love and happiness again.
One thing that you did mention, Thomas, is that you spent the first part of the season studying the board structure of Waystar Royco, which I feel like is going to come in handy for you now. You should be revising those charts because I think we're going to get a very long, drawn-out board sequence, which means Stewie and the Sandys. Ewan's on the board, right? Isn't that something that you found out? He'll be back?
Correct.
Well, we actually had some questions for you because we weren't sure. Is Jerry chairperson and does she have a board vote as chair?
Why are these questions for me? You guys watch the show the same amount as I do.
As chair of the podcast, we thought you are all knowing.
I feel like it's a good question because Jerry would have been, facilitating these kinds of things. She's always been present at board meetings, but I think now she's out of the company.
What I'm hearing here is that you guys want me to talk you through the board before we wrap this up.
Yeah, is Kate around?
Yeah. So allow me to just quickly give you a quick run over of the board before we wrap this up. So the current Waystar board, obviously Logan Roy, RIP, Siobhan Roy, Roman Roy, Frank, Ewan, that'll do pig, Stewie, Sandy Furness, so the Sandy that's not in the wheelchair, Paul Chambers, never heard of him, Dewey Swan, Datu Kazma, Sandy Furness, that's the wheelchair one, and Kendall Roy. So that's the current board. Half of them we haven't seen and I suspect won't play a part. But yeah, as it stands, that's the current people who can vote.
Okay, but then I think there's also the element of who has stock in the company, right? Because Logan's ex-wife has stock in the company. So there's an element of who actually is a shareholder with potential to sway it. Let's get Adele on.
I think they're going to keep things. I think it's going to be characters we know. I don't think there's going to be surprises. I do hope we see a lot of Stewie, and I do hope that Ewan gives another mad speech that shifts things in some direction. Before we wrap up, we've got a couple of future episode announcements to make. So later this week, we'll be back with a precap, previewing the finale, and also looking at the seasons of the show so far. We'll be looking at our best and worst moments from the entire series. We're looking at our best insults ever. We'll be swapping facts about the show we haven't had time to go into yet. And we're basically going to have a lot of fun before we get into the very serious, dense unpacking of this finale. We are not going to get a preview episode for the finale, so we'll be watching it on Monday, the same as everybody else. Our excellent producer, Ruby, will be working very, very hard to get that episode into your feeds as soon as possible after it airs on Monday, so stay tuned for that. Thomas and Mel, stay safe. Enjoy the last week before Succession wraps up.
Thank you. Enjoy your last week of employment, Thomas.
I think the lady doth protest too much.
Well done.
Had to Google that during the pod.